Resident Evil 6.
Before we start the video proper, there is something I would like to quickly address on how I plan on reviewing sequels to games that I haven't yet reviewed. Essentially, what I will be looking at when reviewing a sequel is how vital it is to play the previous game when compared to the game that has been selected. I'll also be looking at how much said sequel builds off of the games that come before it. For example, I own the Mass Effect Legendary Edition collection for the Xbox One. Mass Effect 2 and 3's story directly builds off the games that come before it, and the gameplay remains the same, but with a few changes in mechanics as the series evolved. As such, I don't believe it would be fair to say rank Mass Effect 2 without first looking at Mass Effect 1. If Mass Effect 2 or 3 is to be selected from the randomizer, I would instead change the selection to Mass Effect 1. However, in the event I may not own previous entries in the series, or the game is mostly its own thing, or the game is mechanically different enough, then I will go over the game specifically selected. And our randomly chosen game for today, Resident Evil 6, is very much its own thing. While the game features characters and references from previous games, the story here is mostly self-contained, and the gameplay present here is unique to this game in the series, so I felt it could be held on its own merit for this retrospective. Resident Evil 6 is a very polarizing game in the franchise, often being viewed as the black sheep of the series, and the game that represents everything wrong with what Resident Evil has become. Is this game truly as terrible as everyone says, or perhaps there's more to this game than meets the eye? Let's turn the page and see for ourselves. If you're even moderately familiar with video games, chances are you know about Resident Evil. Resident Evil is a series of video games made by Capcom, and for many is considered to be the pioneer of the survival horror genre. The series started taking a bit of a shift to a slightly more action focus with the release of Resident Evil 4. However, many considered this game to have a good balance between both action and horror, and is often hailed as one of the greatest video games of all time. It was with the release of Resident Evil 5 that it became very apparent that the series was starting to have a greater focus on action, and despite still being well received, it was noted by many that the series had lost a lot of what made it scary. Which brings us to Resident Evil 6. I want to note that when I first got this game, I hadn't played many Resident Evil games. Before 6, my only experience with Resident Evil was Operation Raccoon City, The Mercenaries 3D, and Revelations on 3DS. I really didn't have a lot of experience with the series when it was more horror focused, and as such, I didn't have the comparison of what Resident Evil used to be like. I could really only judge this game based on its own merits. And I'll get this out of the way right now. This game has a lot of issues. But I don't care because I freaking love this game. Certainly not a popular opinion, I know, but hopefully you'll stick with me and allow me to explain why. Resident Evil 6 features 4 campaigns to play through, 3 main campaigns with a 4th one serving as a bonus, meant to answer some lingering questions from the other stories. Of the 3 main campaigns, we have Leon from Resident Evil 2 and 4 with his partner Helena, Chris from Resident Evil 1 and 5 with his partner Piers, and the 3rd campaign featuring newcomer to the series, Jake Mueller, with his partner Sherry Birkin from Resident Evil 2. The story revolves around a terrorist organization known as Neo Umbrella, releasing a deadly virus known as the C virus, turning various people into monsters, and even managing to kill the President of the United States. Each campaign follows one of 3 stories as each team of protagonists deal with the various situations of the outbreak, with each story occasionally intersecting at various points. Leon and Helena fight their way out of a zombie outbreak while trying to put an end to the ringleader of Neo Umbrella. Chris and Piers are tracking down Ada Wong from Resident Evil 2, who seems to be working alongside Neo Umbrella and its spread of the C virus, and is responsible for the death of Chris's squad. Meanwhile, Jake and Sherry try to escape the clutches of Neo Umbrella, as Jake possesses the antibody to the C virus and is the world's only hope of creating a vaccine. Newcomer Jake's campaign was a fun time, as I enjoyed the growing relationship between Jake and Sherry as the two work alongside each other. Jake himself is just a welcome addition to the cast. He's rude and sarcastic, yet so charismatic that you can't help but love him. And while nothing original, his transformation from a selfish mercenary into a jerk with a heart of gold is still enjoyable nevertheless. Leon, I feel, gets the short end of the stick when it comes to story. While he is tracking down the primary villain, his partner Helena isn't terribly interesting, and I don't feel that the two have as much chemistry as the game's other pairings. Leon's story also gets very confusing at points, with many questions not being answered until the bonus 4th campaign, which keeps his story from being as satisfying as it would be otherwise. Chris, meanwhile, probably is my favorite campaign in the game. His centers around his path of vengeance as he tries to kill Ada Wong for the death of his team, His hatred starts taking him to a dark place, causing tension between him and his partner Piers, as the two argue between bringing wrong to justice and focusing on what's right. My enjoyment of his story is amplified further by just how great of a performance Roger Craig Smith does while voicing Chris. Don't get me wrong, all the voice acting in this game is pretty damn good. Matthew Mercer as Leon, Laura Bailey as Helena, Troy Baker as Jake, and Eden Regal as Sherry. Every voice actor gives it their absolute all when performing these characters. However, Roger does a phenomenal job portraying the sheer rage that Chris is undergoing through this campaign. Chris is a character who by this point in Resident Evil has gone to hell and back several times and is finally starting to break from it all, which Roger nails in every line he delivers.
Put your gun down, Chris. She's a key witness. We need her.
A witness? She's the one who did all this!
No, it wasn't her. It was Simmons, the National Security Advisor.
I lost all my men because of her!
Still, no matter which campaign you choose, there's fun times to be had either way, playing through the absolute ridiculous scenarios the characters get into. Is the story perfect? No, far from it. The villains are very one-note, and various plot points can be confusing, if not outright stupid. However, I can easily look past issues like that if I'm having fun. Like some action movies like Fast and the Furious or Face Off, if you just turn your brain off and enjoy the roller coaster ride the story brings you on, you're going to have a great time. I loved seeing what crazy scenarios the characters were placed in, and I had a huge smile on my face well after the credits finished rolling. So yeah, it's far from one of the best stories I've ever seen, but that doesn't mean I didn't have a great time along the way. I also want to take a moment to talk about the game's visuals, as I really like what they've done with this game. It has a very realistic style to it. However, usually when the games go for a more dark, realistic style, it usually uses so many dull grays or puts a filter over everything that just makes the environment look bland and ugly. Resident Evil 6 has this dark, realistic style, yet doesn't sacrifice color in order to do it. Whether it's the neon lights of the city or the glow in a garden, Resident Evil 6 is a very good looking game, and I still think it holds up really well today. Of course, there's no point in playing through the story or seeing all these visuals if the gameplay that takes you through it isn't fun to play. But I wouldn't have described my love for this game if that was the case. Resident Evil 6 is definitely not a survival horror game. It's an action game through and through, and when that's all it's trying to be, it's one of the most satisfying action games I've ever played, especially for a third-person shooter. Naturally, each character has a variety of firearms, and all are fun to use in their own right. However, the game also gives the player a multitude of other abilities. Every character has melee attacks they can use to lay into the enemy without using any ammo, but at the cost of some stamina that slowly recharges. Run out of stamina, and your character's movement will be greatly slowed down as they recover. The player can also perform these quick shots, which can stun an enemy to better give a melee attack, knock opponents back, or even perform a bunch of crazy gun kata moves. As for movement options, the player can sprint, perform combat slides, dodge rolls, and fire the weapon from the ground while being able to roll to the side. All these different moves and ways of dishing out damage give this game such a fun flow, and allows players to perform really cool maneuvers that contribute a lot to that action movie comparison I made earlier. Everything about the way each character plays just feels good, and gives a lot of options on how to handle different combat situations. And in the right hands, you can pull off some maneuvers that look really stylish. I just love it so much. You may have noticed I said that the game is fun to play when it's trying to be an action game. That's because in certain sections of the game, especially in Leon's campaign, it tries to slow down the pace by giving these walking sections that are meant to build suspense or get you to solve puzzles in an attempt to harken back to the playstyle of the original Resident Evil games. I don't think these work very well at all. When you have a game that is built around fun, fast-paced shooting combat, stopping the game to a grinding halt to perform puzzles isn't what you want to do. And I'm sorry, but no matter how hard you try, you can only make zombies so scary and threatening when you have the ability to perform wrestling moves on them. Now, I've said a lot of negatives about Leon's campaign, but I still very much enjoyed it. His campaign is the only one of the three that features zombies, and the zombies are very satisfying to shoot in this game. As you shoot the zombies, you'll see that their bodies actually get damaged and break apart where you shoot them, and it's a really impressive detail. Chris and Jake instead fight these monsters called Juavo. They can wield weapons and firearms, making them a lot more challenging than the zombies. What's more, they're also capable of undergoing transformations after taking damage. The transformation is dependent on where you shoot the Juavo, with their head, arms, and legs each giving a few different results, each which change how they attack you and how you should go about avoiding them. These transformations really kept me on my toes, as it greatly increases the variety of enemy types and leaving me continuing to be surprised by what's thrown at me next. Finally, in terms of enemies, we have one final one exclusive to Jake's campaign, Ustanak, a giant hulking monster with a prosthetic arm. Ustanak appears constantly in Jake's campaign hunting him down, making him similar to Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. However, Usanak's prosthetic arm can be switched out for a variety of different weapon attachments, meaning each time you encounter him, he's always got something new up his sleeve, which makes each encounter unique. And just like with the Duavo, it keeps you wondering what is going to be thrown at you next. If the game was just a straight line with enemies thrown at you with this level of combat, I would have been more than satisfied, because I just have that much fun with how this game plays. However, it's when the absolute insanity of the story gets integrated with sequences you can play through that I start to feel that Resident Evil 6 becomes something really special. Each campaign has so many different unique set pieces that the player gets to play through, and they all keep the game from becoming stale. Fighting a zombie outbreak aboard an out-of-control airplane, a car chase against Ada Wong, fighting Ustanak with 4 of the 6 main characters in a burning wreckage, the initial chaos as the Duavo start to appear in China. No one chapter in Resident Evil 6 is the same as the other, and offers some new crazy situation that is just so exciting to play through. During these moments, the game can have a bit too many quick-time events than I would like thrown at the player, which can get tedious after a while. But again, the fun I have in these moments can allow me to forgive something like this. I would also like to note that Resident Evil 6 comes with quite a bit of content, especially if you bought the Xbox One or PS4 re-releases that come with all the DLC. The base package has 4 campaigns, which will take you a little over 20 hours or so to play through them all of which you can play through alone or with a friend. It also has what I think is the best version of the series' Mercenaries mode. In this mode, you want to defeat as many enemies as you can in a certain amount of time, and the game's fluid combat lends itself so well to the mode. RE6 also has a really unique mode called Enemy Hunt, where you can drop into another player's online campaign as an enemy, like a zombie or Duavo or some of the other special enemy types. Which is a really neat idea, though you'll be hard pressed to get to play this nowadays as the game's online isn't quite as populated as it used to be. Finally, you can also look around for these hidden blue Serpent emblems, which when shot unlock files and eventually models of characters that you can look at. These aren't all that worth it, to be honest, as they can be pretty well hidden, and I don't think the files are all that spectacular. Still, it's there if the player wants to find them. Add the rest of the DLC that comes with the game, and you have an incredibly content-rich experience, which really gives the game that bang for your buck. In my humble opinion, Resident Evil 6 is an absolutely awesome game. The game has its share of issues, make no mistake, but when the game gets exciting, it absolutely fires on all cylinders and never lets up until the credits roll. It has great presentation both visually and with its voice acting, the combat feels great, plenty of content to sink your teeth into, and the game kept me engaged from beginning to end. Is it a good Resident Evil game? No, it isn't. It's clear that this entry abandoned any and all sense of survival horror that made the series what it is. But does this mean it's a bad game? I don't think so. I can go back to this game any day of the week, select a random chapter, and have an absolute blast. And so, it's with great pleasure to say that Resident Evil 6 takes the #1 spot in my ranking. While I do think Alien Isolation is an objectively better game, at the end of the day, I just had too much fun with Resident Evil 6 to put it below Isolation. I know a lot of people will heavily disagree with this decision, but I suppose that's the best part about making a purely subjective list, isn't it? But that does it for Resident Evil 6. Next time, we'll be shifting gears from action games and taking a look at a fighting game, one featuring some of comics' most iconic heroes. Just maybe not the fighting game you'd expect. Thank you so much for watching this video. Take care, and may we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.